Hello. Hello. Hi. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. That was music by Rachika S, who you see here. She
Hi.
also performs in the film. She plays Erica, and her music is used as the soundtrack, and there's also, you'll see a concert in the film which makes use of similar visuals to what you see here on your Zoom webinar. Do you want to add anything, Rachika?
Yeah, those are all songs that are from an upcoming album that I'm still figuring out how to release, but it's going to be called Our Hands Against the Dusk. It's going to be released probably late this year or possibly early next year. So look out for that if you're into it. And thanks.
You can follow her on all the normal social media platforms. Yeah, I've always been drawn to her music in the way I find that it opens space while still containing these strongly emotional elements, but it doesn't have a traditional narrative. And I've always been really drawn to that, and I think you'll see in the film a little bit, hopefully, how I steal and make use of it for my own wicked ways. Yeah, so I think next up, everyone virtually applaud Rachika. You, yes. And I think, and here we have Thomas who'll read in a moment. And then, but before that, we're gonna have Astrid from Ridgewood Mutual Aid. And she's going to say a few words about Ridgewood Mutual Aid, which is a local mutual aid group, which I have been volunteering for myself during this time. It services the folks who live in the area in which So Pretty was shot primarily. So it seemed important to us that we would sort of continue to give back to that community since it formed the space in the world in which this film is able to build its own world. Over to you, Astrid.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jessie, for committing your screening to Ridgewood Mutual Aid. My name is Astrid. I was nominated by other members of the network to come and chat with you a little bit tonight about what mutual aid is and what Ridgewood Mutual Aid has been doing. So Ridgewood Mutual Aid is a project of the Ridgewood Tenants Union. We have a few core tenants, but the real need of it is that we take care of each other, and pardon the trucks going by, and that we are stronger when we take care of each other. So in March, when COVID started to shut down the city, we were pretty confident that the city and state would not take care of this neighborhood in particular. We have a lot of undocumented neighbors and a lot of neighbors who are not able to access various government benefits. So we knew that we had to organize to find a way to make sure that everyone made it through this pandemic and this crisis. So we have a hotline and our neighbors call in. We deliver groceries, we offer legal aid. We are working on a zine where we're collecting stories and art and special moments that have happened over the past 3 months, graduations, births, deaths, so that we can sort of memorialize and remember through creativity what this has meant to our community. Something important to know about mutual aid is that it is not charity. Charity is a hierarchical structure where those who have concentrations of wealth sort of re-emphasize their power over other people by passing down. Mutual aid is building hyper networks, hyper local networks. So it comes from a place where we know that there are resources in the community and there is abundance, and it doesn't need to exist concentrated with anyone, that we have enough to share and we have enough to go around, and it's about taking care of each other. So that's my spiel, and we are fundraising. We're really proud that we have raised over $30,000, which is translated into groceries, over 1,000 grocery runs, and also diapers, menstrual products, PPE, and cleaning supplies for our neighbors. So we operate on a foundation of transparency, so you can, if you're curious and also need a little bit of hope and inspiration, there's a link to a very public tracking where we show what each dollar that has been donated has gone to. Whenever I'm feeling a little low or a little lack on hope, I scroll through that to see sort of what the neighborhood has done. So I'll drop the link to that Chuff campaign in the chat. And then the last thing I'll call out is that part of mutual aid and part of the idea that we can take care of each other and we're stronger when we look out for ourselves is very closely tied to, you know, the thoughts behind abolition and what would it look like to live in a community and a society where we took care of each other and we didn't have, you know, violent, racist, sexist, homophobic, oppressive presences in our neighborhood that are very heavily militarized. So we're having a rally on Sunday that I'll also drop the details for in the chat, and I hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Astrid. And also remember, every dollar that you send to Ridgewood Mutual Aid keeps me riding my bicycle around with groceries on my back, so you can have that amusing image in your head, and also fills me with joy every time I get to drop them off. And it's been, for me, a sort of light of hope through all of this. And as things have continued to become more hectic in the world, it is always comforting to me that there is mutual aid and we can do these things. And it's certainly, as you'll see in the film, tied to the project of the film itself. The film is a film which tries to imagine a different way of existing, a different way of interacting between human beings. And so I think I would feel a little wrong if I weren't continuing that practice outside of the world. So next up, we're going to have Thomas, who will read a translation that he's working on from the novel Zoshun, on which this film is based. Thomas and I worked together a little bit on translating for the film. And now, if all goes well, we may be able to see an English translation of the novel in the very near future. And Thomas will give you a little back history on the novel, and then he'll go ahead and read.
Thanks so much, Jessie, and thanks, Astrid, for giving us that great introduction to the Ridgewood Mutual Aid group. That's great work that you're all doing. And Rachika, thanks for that absolutely gorgeous performance. I love seeing your work and hearing your work. It's always a pleasure. So yes, the film, Jessie's film, So Pretty, is inspired by a novella by a German author named Rovinelli, and I've been working on a translation of it with my partner, Marcus Aviv, and I'd like to tell you a bit about it and read from it. So, Rovinelli experienced the tension between being both gay and communist in West Germany as a provocation to change the world rather than try to fit into it. His revolutionary weapon was prose, at once lapidary and impudent, realist and utopian, banal and beautiful. His 1982 novella, And When the Prince Danced with the Coachman, They Were So Beautiful That the Entire Court Fell into a Swoon, a utopian film, that's the full title, from which So Beautiful, or So Schön, is the shortened title by which it's more commonly known. This novella exemplifies his paradoxical approach. Hidden behind its fairy tale-like title, So Schön is a document of life in West Berlin spent between squats, gay bars, and anti-war protests. It is not the novella's protagonists, four polyamorous gay communists who are so beautiful, but their relations to one another, to their friends and comrades, and to the shattered yet scintillating city. It is a visionary response to a time of political turmoil with enduring relevance in our ever more alienated world. Born in the GDR in 1960, but smuggled into West Germany and raised near Hanover, Schanekau's first book, Small Town Story, was published when he was only 19 years old and just finished high school. It details a student's homosexual awakening and the scandal that erupts when his affair with a classmate is discovered. The book became something of a sensation, garnering positive reviews from major West German newspapers, such as the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung and Der Spiegel. Exceeding the narrow scope of interiority and individuality associated with the contemporaneous literary movement known as New Subjectivity, Schanekau's writing is perhaps better described as autofiction. His frank exploration of subcultural milieus and alternative sexuality through sinewy prose combining slang, quotation, and polemics presages the autofiction of French authors like Guillaume Bustan. But Shaniko's work avoids the latter's macho shock tactics and devil-may-care libertarianism. It more closely resembles recent experiments in autofiction inspired by queer theory, such as Maggie Nelson's The Argonauts, in which sexuality is not set off as a zone of radical transgression, but woven into all levels of life, from the intimate to the international. Shaniko's characters have various and contradictory social positions. In Zoshun, quote, Bruno is an interior decorator, but in Guerra's working group in the party, but doesn't stand out in discos, but loves Paul. Moving fluidly between the economic, the political, the subcultural, and the romantic, Shaniko shows that the gay experience, indeed life itself, is fractured from within and without. His literary style reflects this fragmentation. He writes entirely in lowercase, with no differentiation between dialogue and narration, collaging scraps of speech, song lyrics, and quotidian description in chaotic abundance. But, ever the utopian, Shaniko believed that out of this chaos, a better world could arise. Convinced that East Germany had more to offer despite its flaws, Shaniko worked doggedly to be accepted to study literature in Leipzig. Ironically, he succeeded at last in becoming an East German citizen just before East Germany ceased to exist. In both West and East Germany, the combination of Shaniko's open homosexuality, committed communism, and literary experimentalism proved very hard to market. Only A Small Town Story and his Leipzig thesis saw publication in Shaniko's lifetime before his untimely death in 1991 from AIDS-related conditions. Nearing the end of his life, Shaniko completed an epic novel, Legend, as it's called, whose mythic proportions would be capacious enough to encompass several shorter unpublished works, including Social. After his death, a circle of Shaniko's friends and supporters, including literary superstars Elfriede Jelinek and Peter Hacks, recruited subscribers in order to publish Legend in 1999. Interest in Shaniko has grown over the past decade. Matthias Frinks's biography of Shaniko, The Last Communist, was published in 2008, and theater adaptations of his life and work have been staged at the prestigious Deutsches Theater and Volksbühne in Berlin. A new edition of Legend was finally released in 2019 by Frederica. For English language readers, an introduction to Shaniko's life and work was recently published in the LA Review of Books by Ben Miller and Nicholas Portman. And of course, Jessie's film, So Pretty, was inspired by Shaniko's novella. With these developments, Shaniko's work is at long last beginning to receive the recognition it deserves. In 2020, Zoshun remains as relevant as ever. In the guise of a story of young love and nightlife, Shaniko presents a nuanced view of late capitalism. He writes, quote, most of what moves the youth is connected with myriad threads to the struggle of the working class, to which most youths in our city belong anyway, end quote. The four lovers represent different facets of the post-industrial proletariat, the intellectual, the artist, the white-collar worker, and the laborer. Against vignettes of everyday struggle, their tender caresses and giddy sex are the revolutionary self-love of species being. In contrast with the increasing essentialism of contemporary identity politics, Zoshun does not insist on our differences nor on our commonalities, but on the irreducibility of being together. Quote, when we are with each other, we are with others, or we are always with each other too. End quote. It is there that Shaniko finds utopia. So now I'm going to read from the translation, and I'm going to share my screen so you can read along and also see how unusual the punctuation and formatting is. And when the prince danced with the coachman, they were so beautiful that the entire court fell into a swoon. A utopian film by Ronald M. Shaniko. Actually translated by me and Marquis Sobu. Chapter 3. Guerra walks down the hall with a couple people. The kitchen door is open. The hall is long and lit by open doorways. She goes in this one. The kitchen is bright, like everything, with a dining table, things in white open shelves, dirty dishes, Anyway, the impression of everything in its place. The white vacuum cleaner in the corner. Guerra says, we see her in the doorway. Hey, Franz and Antonio sit at the kitchen table. Franz says, sausage? No, laughs Guerra, no sausage. And Antonio, good morning. Good morning, says Tonio. This is Tonio, says Franz, my latest achievement. He has swallowed. Guerra says, I'm Guerra. Tonio wonders who's with who. Guerra says, I'm with the other boy who lives here. Guerra is tall, thin, athletic, short hair, is open. Sometimes she just nods to settle things because she knows she isn't up on whatever the son does. Is this man in? Asks Franz. Yes, says Guerra. Maybe they want coffee, says Franz mischievously. Guerra gives a snorting laugh, says bye, goes. Franz grabs an empty coffee pot, puts it on a tray like Paul, cups and all, stands in Paul's door and says, coffee, goes to them. They're already lying half on the couch. It's black and white. Suddenly a German pop song plays. Believe in yourself and your life will begin. Franz sets the tray down, pours out no coffee from the empty pot, distributes the filled cups. The boy with Franz just sits, and Paul lifts both hands to his head, thumbs on his temples, wiggles his fingers, sticks out his tongue. In the kitchen, Franz kisses Tony. In the bedroom, Paul kisses the boy. The boy is, like all of them, in his early 20s, looks good in every photo, has short, thick, dark hair, brown complexion, iridescent green eyes, could pull off wearing anything. We could imagine him striking a James Dean pose in a photo shoot and sending the photos to an agency. But he is an interior decorator, but in Guerra's working group in the party, but doesn't stand out in displays, but loves Paul. The four are still kissing each other. The boy Paul kisses could be called Erika, but because he's male, he's called Bruno, or Fritz. Since Fritz is so hard to differentiate from Franz, he's called Bruno. The name doesn't really fit him at all. Erika fits better, but there's already an Erika, so that is. Bruno sometimes looks at Franz as if he could or would take Paul away from him. We don't know why he looks so. But when Franz does something silly, Bruno doesn't look amused sometimes. Chapter 4. One time, this is a flashback, Franz walks to the shopping mall where Bruno works. He does what Bruno would do were he to visit Franz's workplace, were he to have the time. Franz walks up the luminous staircase, rolls by some stands, sees the saleswomen bending over, someone taking a lamp and carrying it off. The price tag flutters as he passes. Franz sees 77 signs dangling from the ceiling, commandingly. At the end of the atrium, someone stands on a ladder and hangs the 78th one. He approaches the ladder, Franz does. It's Bruno up there, all right. He approaches a saleswoman, asks her something loudly and distinctly. Bruno stands over us, looking down from the tall ladder. He sees Franz. Franz acts as if he doesn't see Bruno. The perspective from which we see Bruno looking would be extremely suggestive under other circumstances. Franz has wavy hair and a huge white faux fur jacket. He flirts a bit with the saleswoman, an older woman with a perm who's surprised that Franz is buying a car. We're a bit worried that Bruno might fall. Franz's actions are mean. Franz's actions are mean because they are premised on privilege. Franz leaves with the yarn. Bruno stays. Franz isn't afraid. Franz exits the shopping mall. Security doesn't pursue him, and he walks through the shimmering streets. The sun glints off his hair and it glows red. He sees himself in the glass that clads the shopping mall. He sees the people who see him. He sits in a cafe. Someone comes by. Franz drinks, the other two. They drink to one another. Franz moves on. Franz sits at home and narrates. One takes notes, the other takes photos. Franz moves his hands, pulls his hair, makes a face, lets himself fall back, draws his legs up, looks askew and appraises, laughs and points at something, and stands in the kitchen and wants to grab a cocoa tin and only has the lid and the cocoa flies around the kitchen and Franz laughs and supports himself against the table. Music over it all, and Franz begins to sing. He sings, "Halt the turning world, stop the hands of the clock." We see him, how he, with a mic and all, really, sings into the camera, how he steps just so, how he follows the choreography. Otherwise, the lovely hours with you pass far too quickly. As he sings the verse, "My first rendezvous," we see Tonio again, how he watches France doing whatever. Tonio stands and watches, perhaps in France's kitchen, and thinks, it's impossible. That can't be. That isn't real, and says so. But what's that mean, real, says France. Chapter 5. Bruno is down from the ladder and off work. He stands at the exit of the mall and waits, looks around, waiting. Now his face lights up. He begins to smile. A co-worker flings her arms around a beefcake's neck. Bruno stays standing. Now Paul is there. They stand before one another, smiling broadly. Paul takes him by the hand. They go through the rush hour crush, sit at home and kiss each other. Bruno reads a leaflet that Paul has proudly kept. Bruno asks about it. Paul explains. Then Paul asks something, and Bruno shrugs his shoulder and looks down. What do you think? Stupid. And Renata? Still nothing, says Bruno. She wants to have a girl. We see Paul and Bruno below making tea, Paul, and salad, Bruno. Then they're on the subway, sitting next to each other, each looking elsewhere. Paul lays his hand upon the hand beside him. Bruno pulls it away with a short look. Don't, the others. Meanwhile, they say, how are the new shoes? I still got a blister, but that always happens with the new ones. They should be pretty comfy. They cost enough. I love you. Love you too. You? Jürgen defended his habilitation. We were all there. I asked a question. The whole party group was there. Imagine it. The party group celebrating a member's habilitation with roaring applause. It was not, however, an exceptional case. And now Jürgen's a professor. Now he can become one. Today, I let a sign fall on Mr. Deutsch's head. Intentionally? Kind of. I let it happen. The chain's broken, the one it hangs on. And he couldn't do anything about it. Bruno looks very young, younger than he is. Given the way Bruno talks and sits, we don't really believe a story like his one with the sign. E.g., we don't think he could ball someone out. E.g., we don't think he could go off on someone. They get off the train now, come out in a very green neighborhood, and go through green towards a large concrete building. The narrow streets become full. People the same age as them. These people lie on the grass or get in line for food. In line for food, a young woman stands and hands out leaflets. Hi, Gisela, says Bruno. Gisela says, hi. And Paul, hi. Here to hand out, says Gisela to Bruno. Yeah, says Bruno. Wonderful, says Gisela. Bruno takes a stack and goes to the people on the box. Paul has a list and tries to get people. Chapter 6. The core of the working class. Images of men at a glowing furnace. The arms, the goggles, the heat. People in white lab coats at control panels. People who play soccer on athletics fields. Most of what moves the youth is connected with myriad threads to the struggle of the working class, to which most youths in our city belong anyway. Someone who reads from a podium. Someone who advertises cigarettes dressed as a cowboy. Someone who buys eyebrow pencils. Someone who puts on makeup. Tonio, who leaves the bank. Tonio, who puts his coat on in a bank. Tonio, who looks at the clock. Tonio, who counts money. Tonio, who says, yes, Mr. Deuter. Tonio, who adjusts his tie and goes to the boss. Tonio, who turns off his alarm. Tonio, who comes home at night. Tonio is a bank clerk. Tonio was out with France in the evening. Tonio is actually named Hans Hansen, really, but that would be too funny. Tonio yawns a bit when he is at work, but was out last night with France. France had sung in a bar and took Tonio along to places where he, France, was known. France always sits with his back to the audience, he calls it, when most people rather want to wall behind him. So France blends in well with most folks in this respect. On this day, yesterday, France has his white coat on again, and plays the loft with his hair again, and drinks hot lemonade, Tonio, gin and tonic. Someone comes up to their table. The bar is white, pictures on the wall, very modern, and greets France, and from the side, Tonio. Who's that? Tonio is a bit too well dressed. like Franz, but different. He hasn't been able to change yet since work, and he wrote Jessie too. Franz tries hard not to differentiate between performing and Tonio tries to differentiate between his work and his time here. When Tonio hasn't carefully masked it, bystanders can see that he's a bank clerk from a mile away. Tonio is homosexual. Far fewer people see that, though. If Tonio weren't employed in a bank, he would get a little strand of his bangs dyed, turquoise perhaps. The evening spent in the bright bar is beautiful. Once Tonio also greets someone he slept with, he tells Franz, and it's a miracle the guy says hi at all. Franz and Tonio bring their heads close together and laugh. Franz gives him a kiss, Tonio. Tonio manages not to pull away. So, yeah, thanks everyone. That's it.
Hi, I'm back. Thank you, Thomas, so much. That was lovely. That is the first time that I've ever heard this novel in English. So it's a bit of a shock to hear something you've spent 3 years of your life adapting in English for the first time. And it's quite lovely. You'll see some of the scenes in what Thomas has read play out in the film in a bit of a different way in a few moments when we begin the film. I'll just say a few words by way of introduction. Whenever I screen the film, I always encourage the audience to start with the bodies. For me, this is a film of people who showed me how to live. These were all people that I knew beforehand, and I made the film in large way to sort of give back the gift that they had to give into me, in the same way that I tried to make the film to give back the gift that Ronald Chernyshov himself had given me. This novel was something that I found myself returning to as I became sort of unclear on what a decent future would look like for me politically, and also in terms of my own body and in terms of the way that I would live. When I began the film, it was not clear to me that I was in fact a woman, and ironically I ended up performing in the film as one. So when you watch the film, it will go its ways, it will drift, it will wander. That's fine. Just whenever you get lost, try to look at their bodies, look at how they stand, how they hold, what they wear. I'm hoping that in this film I can give you space. And certainly to screen the film now in the middle of what feels to me to be one of the most important political moments in the last half century of our country, I hope that it can give you a little moment of peace and also a dream of what it might feel like to live in a world that isn't built so brutally on extracting money from the poorest and most marginalized groups of society. But it tries to imagine that world through touch, through gesture, and through care. So after the film, I'll have a few words with Mackenzie Wark, theorist and writer, and then we'll open up to just a few brief audience questions. So please enjoy the film, and I will talk to you after the show. It runs about 83 minutes. Goodbye, and thank you. And thank you to everyone in the chat saying such nice things to Thomas. A round of applause for Rachika, for Thomas, and preemptive round of applause for everybody that worked in the film. And I would just like to say thank you, as always, to Bill Kirstein, my cinematographer and producer, who drags me kicking and screaming into these shoots when I feel overwhelmed. So enjoy. Hello. Thank you. Thank you all so much for sticking around. I think we'll have Mackenzie Wark with us in just a moment. Mackenzie? Mackenzie. There she is.
Hello.
Hello.
I just had to wait till I was unmuted so I could speak again. Well, it's thanks to everybody for sticking around till the end. I actually kind of like seeing it with the, low frame rate, because then I got to see actual individual frames in a little bit and kind of like, oh, that's, you know, that's kind of, it's nice it passes through this moment and I get to see that as well. So, I mean, I know it's not the ideal viewing conditions. We really should be in a cinema watching this, you know, in the 35mm print. But
we'll be hopefully in the future screening the film on 35mm back in our movie houses, which, yes, someday I have faith we will return to.
You notice how I set that up for you to sort of, you know, plug that. All right, so if people have things they would like asked, if you put them in the chat, not the Q&A, the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that to see if anything comes up that people would like to know about. I thought the thing I'd start out with is the way the film connects to the present, in that there's a demonstration, we don't know what it's for, because that's, I think, left, you know, suitably vague. And then perhaps not surprisingly, it's the Black character who ends up injured, you know, is chased and you know, finds their way home. But the thing I wanted to talk about is the part that, I mean, I've had conversations with a lot of people about this just over the last week, is caring for people in moments of direct action. So I wonder if you could sort of talk a little bit about that in the context of the film.
Yeah, you know, when the film was being made, I think it was a moment where America was not quite clear what protest or resistance should look like. There was a sort of awareness among the more liberal chunk of America, as opposed to the radical left chunk, that, oh, now maybe things were bad enough that we should do something, but there wasn't really a sense of what that might look like. And the thing about protest is now we're lucky enough to have something that is very clear, and I mean, we shouldn't say lucky, it's wretched, but there is a real shift in the ways in which activism is happening on the streets now, which I think is for the best, and we're seeing real changes as a result of it. But as someone who spent perhaps too much time or exactly the right amount of time at protests, I was struck by the fact that a lot of the times you're going to these things and you're going to them to make your voices heard, but you know on some level that no one is listening, or that it's nearly impossible. We dream of being listened to, but what we do is speak to one another, and it's a moment where you're going to interact quite intimately with close friends and also with strangers. So you have this part of, you're in a community and you're in a crowd, and you are fighting the police, which is something that's been heightened to an absurd degree over the last few weeks in New York City. And I'm sure any of you who've been out and on the streets have experienced what I have. It's just this incredible constant negotiation between your accomplices, between the broader members of the protest, and between this authoritarian, brutalist, violent police establishment. And what I was interested in the film was in the ways in which protest becomes a model for taking physical care of one another. We protect one another when we're in the streets. We put an arm between a more marginalized person and a police officer. We offer cigarettes or water to fellow protesters. We organize on the fly and decide where to go. You ideally hold hands with a buddy so that you are safe. And this struck me as something very interesting. So even if protest is not successful in making its voice heard, there is this moment where we are heard and felt and touched by those around us. And that was something very interesting to me. And so if I was going to include this film, a film that hopefully would screen in a variety of political contexts and times, that what I wanted to draw out was the ways in which people interact and care for each other on the streets, and to then draw that way of interaction into other places.
Yeah, and then I want to connect that to the kind of, or the sense in which you demonstrate against something or organize against something. But there's also this really strong sense of creating something for itself, like creating community, using public space as if the space already belonged to us. I mean, for somebody of my vintage, for a group of femmes to just be walking down the street and no one even says anything about that is kind of extraordinary, and not something to kind of let go of as an achievement. So yeah, do you want to say a little bit about, and I want to connect this a little bit to mutual aid being the thing that we're supporting here, because I sort of see the little sort of elements of that already in it, that it's kind of sustaining these networks and creating the space is maybe where that comes from.
Yeah, I mean, right now we're being asked, you know, okay, so what does a world without the police look like, for example? And on the one hand, you have a lot of very brilliant thinkers and writers who are giving us like somewhat concrete examples of what a world without police looks like. And it's a world that we absolutely should fight for. All cops are indeed bastards and they should be abolished. But at the same time, it is true, this is stepping into an unknown. We will never know. We don't have a modern state that exists without the police. We should, desperately. We know that it is better. At least if we really give this any thought, we know that the police do not do any good. But we don't know what it will feel like to live in a world without police. We just know that it might feel better. And so in the case of the film, the film attempts to create a space for its characters, just as the characters attempt to create a space for themselves that says, we don't know what this better world will look like, but we can try to create it both in how we move on the streets together, and then as a filmmaker, I create that world within the film. So the film is a beautiful dream and a lie, but it's about characters who are trying very hard to make their own beautiful dream and lie. And it was helpful for me because I cannot predict the future. I know where I stand, and I know that where my politics are, and they certainly involve an anarchist and anti-capitalist sort of way of engaging with the world, but I can't tell you what the future world would look like. So I wanted to make a film to give myself a dream of what other forms of interacting would be. I'm also noticing that Nathaniel Hoyt in the chat asks, touch seems so important and constant to the narrative. Was that physicality is something you were particularly conscious of? Yeah, all of my films are about bodies first and foremost. I'm very interested in how we communicate sort of non-verbally, and then how that sort of non-verbal communication interacts with text, like in this case, the novel Zoshun, and also music, and how those things go together. So for me, it was a dance film. And for me, the interesting thing about dance is the bodies don't touch so often, but when they do, it's very magical. So it was creating spaces in which touch could happen and in which touch could be the basis of community. I mean, at the end, you see this very clearly. They literally pass the kiss. They just pass the sense of kissing around the room. So yeah, it's one way besides money that you can build an economy of the world, an economy of touch rather than an economy of cash.
And then we have another question that's that initial kitchen scene is a masterpiece of self-made choreography. Could you talk a bit about the construction and production of that scene, or the layers of conversation and movement in and out of the frame?
Yeah, so the way that I work, I give my participants, I choose the word participant rather than actor. They're not non-actors, and they're not actors, that they're participants. They participate in the world that we build together. So I always have a very, very strict camera. I know what the camera's going to do. I work with my cinematographer, Bill Kirstein, with whom I've been working for many, many years now. And we know exactly what the camera is going to do beforehand. And I'm very interested in the ways in which my participants have their freedom to move separately. But we do start them in various places around the frames that I know. If I start you here and I start you there, then you're going to talk or interact at these cross angles, so I can see all these layers of ways of interacting. So yeah, the kitchen scene is where that comes to a peak, and I knew that we were going to hear all these lines of conversation happening over each other. I knew that I'd read people around the room such the camera would move through them and we'd see these layers. But in terms of actually doing it, basically my cinematographer is just sitting there slowly doing his camera move to himself without telling anybody in the room when it's on. So I would stand there in the scene and sort of chat, and like sort of, you'll notice my character's a bit of a director in the film. She tries to make things happen. She really wants to push things in a certain direction. So I'm literally standing in the room trying to push the conversation in a certain direction to like I'm happy with. And then I like kind of wink at Bill, something a little more subtle wink, and then Bill goes. So nobody in the room knows when we're rolling or not. And I'm just sitting there basically quietly telling him to turn the camera on and off for a while until I have what I thought I wanted. And then in the edit, that scene just got longer and longer. Those of you who don't like it, I'm sorry. In the initial like a minute, but we were getting really strong audience feedback to it, and I just wanted to exist in it. I wanted you to be in that space until you couldn't follow a conversation anymore, until you were just in the room with them. And so words start to drift away.
Yeah, like I've seen that 20 times, and I see different little details in it because there's so many people doing things. But I'm now sort of putting some things together, because the way you're playing the character of Tonya, she's a little bit of like a social top. You know, she's kind of like directing people and stuff. But it hadn't occurred to me you're actually having to direct from inside the scene as the director. Do you think that affected your version of the character a little bit?
Yeah.
Or at least what her actions would be?
In the original script, she's still, I mean, there's a great deal of freedom for all the participants to sort of do whatever they want, but she is in the novel and in, well, less so in the novel. Anyway, to some degree, she was always a bit of a pushy one. She's the artist, you know, artists are preferable and want to do what they want to do. But then certainly, like, I knew as soon as it had to be me, we lost the original person who was playing my character. And so once it was me, it became inevitable that there was going to be this back and forth between those two roles. And yeah, I thought that was cool. I mean, you know, she is a stand-in for me, certainly, though I don't have the same life that she does.
It was kind of great to have Thomas read a bit of the book beforehand, because it is kind of like, it claims to be a film script, and it's not exactly written by one, but it is sort of only interested in the external actions, and it really just cuts between scenes. I wonder how much of that ended up in your version of it, or do you find yourself sort of fighting the kind of, you know, Schoenekauer's DOP to kind of construct it differently?
Well, later in the novel, he will actually give camera instructions. And those have all been tossed out almost entirely, except I very loosely reinterpreted his instructions for the very last scene when you see them all picking up the poles. It's not what he would have wanted, but it's kind of related. So, yeah, no, I sort of deliberately set up an adversarial relationship with Schoenekau. I am not him, I'm not German, it is not the 1980s, and I got a bunch of girls in my movie, and he doesn't. She's great in the original novel. So I wanted that tension there. So chucking out what he wanted me to do with the film script, while at the same time fulfilling his goal, make a movie, seemed like a properly playful way to engage with him. You know, you can see in his writing, he's endlessly open and kind and generous, but he's also like a bit playful and provocative and can kind of be a little bit of a punk. So it felt like, you know, I mean, I feel all of these things myself. And so to have an honest discussion with him meant deliberately ignoring him or mistranslating him some of the time, and then other times just diving into him fully. And so it always moves in and out of the novel.
Right, yeah. Well,
everything is ours for the taking, you know, in that way.
Well, yeah, that brings me to something you said when you opened it, that sense of returning the gift. And then how does one do that as an artist or a writer? Like, you're not obliged to give it back as the same thing. Like, what would be the fun of that? So there's something different for Schoenekauer. But then also to the people that you sort of, in the acknowledgement of the girls who saved your life. But do you want to talk a little bit about the gift and what we owe to each other? And maybe that connects to this theme of mutual aid as well.
Mackenzie referenced briefly there, there's a credit that you didn't get to see at the very end, which the film is dedicated to all of my girls who saved my life. For certainly, there was quite a chunk of women who, well, girls actually, not women, who saved my life. And so this was a way of giving back what Thomas and Rachika and Adam and these various people had given me, and also Schoenekau and also New York City and the many groups here. So yeah, it's a self-consciously passing on a gift, which was again a way to think about politics in something other than this adversarial framework. I mean, we can and should and must spend a lot of time as activists or just as concerned human beings, you know, in this adversarial mode. But I question how useful artists are in that mode. You see so many political films that work in an adversarial mode, and they just fall flat. They denounce things which of course anyone would denounce, and so the film form starts to lose its richness and to collapse into the denunciation. So
yeah, that's hard, isn't it? Like, yeah. Like, if you're an artist or a writer, what are you supposed to do?
To be a political artist for me is to give a gift of making a space for political thought to happen, a space for political thought to just recline, to relax within. Which is why I decided to move forward with this screening. I mean, it's not a film that directly deals with the current moment, but I felt like it was close enough that maybe it could provide a little solace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not the only person who's been through moments like this before, and I was witnessing people I'm close to or that I love or even don't know that very well burning out. and sort of being the one who's saying, take care of yourself. You know, it's okay to take time out, you know, check in with the people, like all that sort of thing. And it seems to me that the film is actually also doing that, you know, so the Paul character comes home and someone bandages him, someone gives him a cup of tea, you know, that's part of it as well, right? That's part of the struggle as well.
Yeah, I always thought it was weird, this current obsession with self-care. I mean, fuck, my utopia certainly doesn't involve me just having to self-care all the time.
Yeah, you're all right, but a little bit, you know, like it's sort of like care for others is maybe more.
I mean, by all means, but you know, occasionally maybe someone can make you dinner.
Yeah, exactly. Care for others seems to me to be part of it.
You know, again, this, and hence, I suppose, the mutual aid thing.
Yeah,
that is the goal. That is mutual aid, which is really just.
And because we live in capitalism, you're going to have to give your money to Ridgewood Mutual Aid because that's how it currently works.
Whack that link, which we'll drop in the chat for you all one more time. Just so you don't forget. Yeah.
There we go. Yep. So just to do the plug before we wind up, really, yeah. Shout out to Ridgewood Mutual Aid Network. Send them some money.
From, I think it must have been before the film, someone asks their way to join the union and lets us know that there is a rally for called Brooklyn Liberation for Black Trans Lives on Sunday. Wondering if we could recommend people join them both. I would certainly encourage folks to attend the Black Trans Liberation Rally at the Brooklyn Museum, if this is the one that I'm intending going to. So if it is, you will see me there. And as for joining the union, I'm not sure. I think you can find it on their website. There's a Google form. You'll fill out your information, let you know where you're at. It's either always for Spanish language speakers or any foreign language speakers are super helpful. Or if you just have access to a car, then you can be in help. So, yeah.
Yep, click on the link, and I was just on that website. It's all on there. You can figure out where to go from the donate page. Yeah. All right. Anybody got any questions out there that they would like to ask in the chat? Feel free, because you know I think I could talk to you about this for hours, and we have. But, you know, we might want to let people get on with their evening. I wanted to come back actually to that last scene, because like the kitchen scene, it seems like it really is kind of a big production. And to think sort of a little bit about your sort of formal decisions about how you're going to, you know, sort of wrap up all of those characters in this sort of one lovely shot.
Yeah, so that last scene, I seem to have a tradition where in all of my films, the last scene is something that we envision long before the rest of the film. So I typically, I guess I'm a filmmaker who starts from the end. So I knew that it would be this passing of a kiss. And so before I have really a plot, before I have any characters, I usually start with my last scene and how I want to shoot it. So, you know, I'm not a director who puts actors first, except that I absolutely adore watching them move. So in this case, I knew that the whole film was going to be these slow dollies. My first film, the camera's almost always locked off. For this one, I wanted it to move slowly throughout. And so, okay, we thought for the last one, let's really release the camera, finally allow it to really move through space, to sail in these larger distances. So we just knew from the beginning, like, it's going to be this passing a kiss, because for me, that's the whole film. It's this passing a kiss around. And then the easy way to end a Q&A, my character walks off and she goes off camera. And she's going to all of you. For a metaphorical kiss, for an actual kiss, you must ask. But hopefully, you know, I will be welcomed into the world, and the film will be welcomed into the world, and we'll find out what happens from there.
That's the gift. It's the kiss. Yeah, that it ends with. Oh, all right, hon. Well, I think, you know, unless I don't see any other questions, and you know, I think we've had a wonderful evening. Thanks to everybody who put this together and got me to come. Somebody says they're letting it all soak in. So it's like, yeah, it's been a whole experience. So thank you, everybody. And it will be streamed in 35mm when we're allowed to go back to
In the
the
meantime, before we can screen it in 35mm, the film, go to Sentient Art Films website. They are the distribution company who will be distributing the film, who set up the screening tonight. And we're currently screening at virtual movie theaters in, I believe, Los Angeles and Denver. So you can view the film there. There we go. And yeah, tell your friends, watch the film, and keep us alive. And then hopefully we'll see you in cinemas in the fall. But please go support your local movie theater, and there'll be an evolving list of theaters that are playing the film throughout the summer in these virtual theaters. All right.
See you
Thanks,
on the streets.
See you in the streets, or I'll see you at the movie theater, or I'll see you at the party. We'll all do all right. Bye.